focused attention that we should replace military and strategic attitude, and the main messages, maybe you heard them and recorded them. So our discussion goes around two levels about how people answered on the questions about reintegration of Crimea and the view of the expert on the same matter. And we should articulate and understand why there is no comprehensive strategy of returning Crimea and its reintegration. And I would like to address Refat Chubarov, the Deputy of Ukraine. Please, could you tell us who should be the initiator of creating of this state strategy, and who should implement it and who should create it? Thank you. As the previous speakers, I would like to thank the Fund of Democratic Initiatives and Social Service of the Center named after Razumkov for the survey. For me, these figures, the results of the survey, they are very interesting. And I would say that I do not doubt any figure, but I have maybe some questions to the options that I mentioned in the survey. And there are many different thoughts about our internal tasks if we come out of these results that we discuss. And we see here contradictions between Ukrainian society and Russian society, and comparison between Levada Center. This provides additional views of this result. So about assessment and the assessments, whether this is the traditional role of the great state when Russia tries to implement its interests, and Russians say 70% for. So they want to see their state as a powerful and great state, and they are educated through TV channels. And the Ukrainian research, it shows that there is some actions of Russian power, but only 9% of Russians understand that these activities are carried out by their leaders. And these figures show that we here in Ukraine do not work properly. And I'm concerned of this figure of 30.7% of people who believe that the issue of returning the Crimea to Ukraine is not timely. So we need to resolve this issue, but it is not the right time. So this is assessment of our society. This is assessment to us that our actions are not enough, that there should be different reaction. And it should say not because we wanted to, but they should understand why we should not delay the issue of returning Crimea for mid-term perspective or long-term perspective. This is a threat to Ukraine. And this figure, it should mobilize us for our further activity. I don't want to repeat. A lot has been said that reflects my views. And for me, that it would be interesting, the formulation of the status of Crimea as the status of autonomy and national and territorial autonomy. Here is another issue. When we asked the citizens about how we should solve the issues on the status of Crimea through all Ukrainian referendum, or it should be resolved by Crimeans themselves. And Mr. Andriy Kymenko said it brightly that what is going on with the community that is called Crimeans. And for 23 years, it disturbed us because it didn't allow Ukraine to be strong in one's own in the country. So the rights of the people in Crimea, they should be observed, because this notion, Krymchani, Crimeans, it shows that Ukrainian power didn't take care of these issues, and it resulted in the things that happened. So there is another issue that I paid attention to. This is an expert opinion. I would like to thank the experts for their approach. They sum up those results of the survey, and it shows that the work was carried out properly. And when we are speaking about the future of Crimea, and it is connected with the issue that was given about the strategy should be developed and adopted by the state. But while discussing the issues, expert community should be involved in the development, and those foundations who deal with issues of returning Crimea, and also Mejlis also should be included in these processes. And if we want to speak about the strategy as a comprehensive view that is based on state position, on the approach of the big number of the majority of Ukrainian society and the parties that view themselves not only as the sides of the realization of the strategy, but also as communities that will be, to some extent, will feel that the strategy will be implemented properly. This strategy, it should have appeared a long ago, and some civil society associations, they made some steps, and here we said about Maidan of Foreign Affairs. So the state institutions, the National Council of Security and Defense, Administration of President, they should have proper basis for forming the strategy. I know that this work has been started, and we directed our representatives and experts there, but there is no result. They worked on, and they created some part of this work, and there is a part that is worked on at the level of secrecy.
When they will be summarized together, when they will be presented to the society, I can't say now. The last thing, the matter which is articulated in such a simplified manner, where the reintegration is possible, where the return is possible, I think that the response is so simple, but it should be understandable to all people of Ukraine. It is not the non-return of Crimea is impossible. So the question whether it is possible to return Crimea, we should answer this question that it is impossible not to return Crimea. Both the government and the people should understand this in Ukraine. This is quite another articulation of this message. We should return it. Now, the next question is what for? This is the basis to understand when and how. The question of returning Crimea may be just a kind of long-term perspective. It could be a priority, not the top priority, because the main question is sovereignty. The Crimean question is the question of restoration of Ukrainian border. This is not the question of military actions which take place in the east, where we defend our territories. Here, we are in the process of global negotiations, and this is not Ukraine, but mostly our allies. They negotiate on global level about returning Russian Federation into the framework of lawful actions of adherence to sovereignty of other states, or just the world may decide to give Ukraine to the Russian Federation in these negotiations. This is what Mr. Samus was talking about our intensification of our actions in the military sector and defense sector. We should find such forms of counteracting and our behavior and our struggle for restoration of our borders, so that our partners can know other opportunity than to go from us far, to go for some separatist dialogue with Putin. I feel this with every my cell of my body when I am a member in some negotiations with Western partners, because I see that they are ready to surrender Ukraine, but they can't explain this in public, that they are ready to forget about Helsinki agreements. They should blame Ukraine in something in order to prove their own positions why they surrender Ukraine. That is why we should conduct policy so that they have only one option, to support us, and no other options. Sometimes in just private life we form our policy so that our friends has no other opportunity than to support us. So those people who are saying that reintegration of Crimea is untimely, they surrender Ukraine. Thank you, Mr. Chubarov, for your speech. it seems to me that it is very demonstrative. The three answers of respondents, 34% and 32%, and Crimea will return to Ukraine itself, 30%. Very rather big percent of our citizens feel passive attitude of our state. This is if we use simple words. And Refat Chubarov said that the government works on the strategy. Let's return to this question. What is the difference between the expert space and the state? I thought to give the floor to Alexei. As concerns the platform, it's better that Mr. Chubarov tell about the platform. He knows how to make it in practice. What is the platform of communication between the state and our expert community? So that the vision which is presented here, the proposals which we articulate here, they are communicated to the ministry and other official bodies. As for me, my colleagues may have another opinions, other vision. So far, such a platform has not been in existence. The government has been conducting dialogue with some forces, some groups. I don't like to blame government in having not enough dialogue with Mejlis, but at our meetings we discuss some questions. I hope that soon the working group will be formed in the Constitutional Commission to prepare relevant amendments to Section 10 of the Constitution of Ukraine, Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And the president in his speech said that the working group of members of Constitutional Commission, also experts will be engaged from Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people. So this will be a kind of platform, and additionally this platform will host discussions, polemics, and debates on the status of Crimea in future. As concerned the liberation of the strategy, I know not enough about this question. I know that the National Council of Security and Defense, they supposed to create such a platform, but they didn't. As for me, the activities were noticeable. The minister is young. He has certain training background, and he communicated with organizations and experts, but our bureaucracy is so vast that the proposals of even national budget, these ministries, they don't have funds and they don't have premises, so national budget allocations are required. Although this area is most important for us, we observe delays with solutions to this question. The minister should have potential to create such a platform. I would like to readdress our topic to Yusuf Kurkchi. I know that they sought to talk at this panel discussion. From previous debates on air, I know that the ministry it has been established, hasn't it? Only the top management has been established, but the resolution, the regulations of this ministry and its staffing, they have not been established yet. So 60 days has not yet passed from the date of formation of new government. Do you have premises, tables, paper, computers? Are people working now? 2.5 years have passed since the annexation of Crimea. In the premises of some institution for Donbass, our ministry is also located. Not everything depends on our willingness. As soon as budget funds are allocated and premises are allocated and also staffing and regulations are formed. Why the state procrastinates with this question about Crimea? When we talk, not many people are talking about Crimea in politics, in civil society. Who in civil society are talking about the Crimea? They are mostly people originating from Crimea. By this time, the matter of the Crimea, it was the question which has been bothering and which was important only for people from Crimea. For Ukraine, so that its machinery starts working in this aspect. This question should become relevant in Ukraine. If 2 years more of the trends will remain the same, then we can find no allies and no resources to return this matter on the agenda. Not to resolve them, but just to return to the agenda. I would like to give the floor to Pavlo Kazarin, journalist, Krym.Realii, which is translated Crimean in reality. What is the real attitude to the situation and what is the perception of Ukrainians here? Does it differ from your vision? Good afternoon. Krym.Realii as a platform, it has been in existence since 2014. Our editorial was based in Kherson because we thought that we would move to Simferopol soon, that all of those things, that the annexation, it seemed the game, even after March 18th, after the warfare started in Donbass. Just remember yourself in 2014. If you were told in 2013 in November that the Crimea will be annexed and the Georgian president will lead Odessa region in Ukraine, you would tell them I am crazy. When the illusions were broken, our editorial moved to Kiev, so we are based in Kiev now. The problem is that Krym.Realii, we don't like to turn Krym.Realii in so kind reservation of Crimean topics. For example, Crimean.Reality is the magazine, the newspaper, the portal where Crimean topics are discussed, and all other mass media. What for they should cover the materials from Crimea? Sevgil Musaeva is in Ukrainian Pravda, is one of the staff in Ukrainian Pravda. Well, let her to write some articles about Crimea to cover the event there. I know why is it so. In 2014, the phrase compromised those people, Donbass is not understood. We heard it from separatists and militants, but let's be honest, before 2014 we didn't know ourselves. This year, we first looked at the problem of smuggling and about the production of amber in Ukrainian police, that illegally production of amber have been in place in Ukraine for 25 years. So starting with 2014, Ukraine starts to understand itself, starts to identify itself. And it is not good that Crimean is besides the borders of Ukraine. So all myths remain in place about Crimea, which has been accumulated for 23 years. So what my colleagues was telling about, it was a formula that Ukrainian collective unconsciousness, it doesn't have the response to the question, what for do we need return of Crimea? It should be a reaction, direct reaction when a person is woken up at night. That person should give the answer that the Crimea will return to Ukraine. In summer this year, I opened Facebook, and Alexander Turchinov signed the document initiating ATO operation, and many articles about this event were on my Facebook page. Why do we appellate to this date? Everything started in February in Crimea, but not in Donbass. First Ukrainian military men died there. And the first combats between Ukrainian and Russian armies started there, and the war started there in Crimea when foreign flags were installed beyond the governmental buildings of Ukrainian power. So the formula, the war started from Crimea and it should end with Crimea. This formula should be explicit and for Ukrainians why the Crimea should return to Kiev control. This is a matter of general request. If the topic of Crimea will sound only on special platforms and from a definite circle of politicians who will address only this single topic, then no result, no integrated result could be expected, because policy works from request. If we do not file requests for the topic of returning Crimea or resolving some tactic tasks related to the peninsula, then no politician will raise this topic at all. For abstract ordinary person, a topic of returning Crimea is very long term. For Donbass, they think that this is a short-term topic which could be touched, and the Crimean topic, it goes beyond millions of years. Yeah, there are strategic and tactic topics. For example, tactical topics are a service center on the border between Crimea and Kherson region. This is not a complicated topic. This is just political will which is required in order to establish such center. It doesn't even require much money. The generation of people has grown in Crimea for these 25 years, who used to perceive themselves as the Ukrainian political project. They are 16, 13 years old. They didn't take part in any pseudo referendum. And Moscow is now trying to privatize this Ukrainian generation, given their maximum favorable regime, in order that they use these favorable conditions and built into the Russian Federation structure. It's better for us to give them favorable conditions and to build them into Ukraine. And they will become the bridge connecting all Crimean cities with all Ukrainian cities. For this, we do not need some large amounts of money. Just the green light should be turned on at every educational road crossing. It doesn't require money, it requires only political will. As every time when we put this question on the agenda, we should find understanding, but we find not understanding, and such means that only separatists live in Crimea. And even I have been experiencing such malevolence. So the task of the Russian Federation is to persuade the world that the Crimean civilians, they were the driver of the annexation of Crimea. And if we impose on Crimeans this responsibility, then we will play inside Russian propaganda's agenda. But the reality is that if the Russian army wouldn't have come to Crimea, then there were just several days of some meetings when people were not
Это и является той самой политической близорукостью,
civilians, they were only victims.
Thank you, Pavel, for this emotional speech. And at this moment, I would like to give the floor to the audience, because Alexey Vasilyevich, sorry, but you will sum up our today's discussion by your conclusions. So let's involve the audience in our discussion. And Pavel formulated two arguments that are very important. Not money, but wish, and why it is so happening like this. So what is your opinion? Please introduce yourself first, and then ask or comment. Natalia, UCMC. Firstly, I would like to thank you for this wonderful opportunity to speak to this research and to support those ideas. We know this topic, and I have an answer to your key question about the platform, Ukraine Crisis Media Center. We monitored this topic from the very start, and we see that this topic is outside the attention of the state. I'm not a Crimean Tatar, but we are involved in all these processes. Me too, he says. And the answer is like this. We conducted several roundtables on this topic. We feel that there is a need in deep cooperation, and we also prepared an address to the Minister on occupied territories to organize an open platform for discussions in two different areas. First, these are the expert groups on local issues, where we could use this free platform to bring together the interested parties, and we can carry discussions here. And also there can be a spokesman on Crimean issues that can, on permanent basis, for example, like Andriy Kymenko informs us about ATO area events. So this person can collect the information from all governmental institutions, and then he can collect this information, and then he can inform us about the reaction, the response of the state on this topic. So I read Chubarov on Facebook, and I see that there is a lot that is done. I brought people, for example, I phone Refat Chubarov, and he is constantly abroad, and they carry out really great work. But the results of research show that only 50% of people know about it, and 30% of people believe that this issue is not timely. So we, as independent platform, we are not financed by parties. We are independent. We propose our platform in order to discuss these issues here, and we will be really glad if you support us in this respect, and we will cooperate. So I don't have questions on the proposals. Thank you. So any opinion on this, please be active. Andriy Concord Company. If we are speaking about Crimea, we should say that it was integrated in Ukraine. So I was brought up in Galicia, but my relatives lived in Crimea. And I understand that our state officials, they were increased 7 times, and there are people who wait for orders the papers that they will bring, and only civil society can react, and they do not wait for orders. And this is an alternative strategy, as, for example, Maidan of Foreign Affairs. This can be an initiative from us, and when we are forming the decisions based on the information provided by Mr. Kazarin, for example, so people can get information and will take the decisions easily. It depends mostly on us. So we try to find common grounds for the organizations that are ready to help, to provide recommendations to the state, and why is it so, and what to do next. So this is the question to audience. So there is a question from the audience. Please introduce yourself. Dmitry, Chernomorsk TV company. The question to Refat Chubarov. Repeatedly we heard about the necessity of such effective deoccupation and the reintegration as the creation of separate Crimean Tatar and Crimean Tatar military forces. The minister Arsenovaka said that something like that is not needed for Ukraine, because Ukraine is Ukrainian, so National Guard should be Ukrainian and but multinational, and we do not need separate forces in Ukraine. So how this state policy can be reflected in reintegration, the occupation, the reintegration of Crimea, and political and the influence of this on the Crimean and Tatar people. I wouldn't mix these questions on national and territory autonomy and the question of a military unit that would be massively composed of Crimeans. So there are many issues and some wrongful statements. They are discussed actively. Some of them tries to argue, others try to accumulate new assumptions. What we are speaking about. So Crimea will return to Ukraine. We have no doubts about it. And in the course of freeing the Crimea, there will be, in the days, weeks, months, there will be many difficulties. People know about it. People who studied the experience of what was going on in the east of Ukraine and the occupied territories when the territory was returned to Ukraine. And first days or weeks, it will be really important to provide all those plans that should be included in the strategy, starting from rebuilding of control and ending with the conduction of the election in Crimea that would allow to normally transfer to peaceful life. So you can imagine what is the occupation after 2 years, so we can assess this differently. There should be proper public order and restoration of trust between people that will be including those who are military and politicians and those people who stayed there and were in different situations and in different uniforms. So this trust is very important, the restoration of this trust. And also there should be security of buildings, of officials, and who can provide this? It can be done only by servicemen, Russians, Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars. So this is the idea of Tatar Crimean battalion. And there is practical reasons for this. So people serve and they have the need to provide, for example, for their traditions. They have special attitude to halal, we mean special traditional food, or For example, people reject alcohol. These are hundreds of people like this. And some people do not want to know because they did not face it. And people, they do not want to take one more problem. And if every day 2 or 3 or 5 young people, they just come out and they do not want to serve in Russian army forces, but they will be recruited because according to the law of the occupants, these young people will be recruited in the armed forces by law. And there are some cases that should not be discussed publicly. So I placed information on Facebook yesterday, and I believe that we will continue this topic. We are speaking about the matter that there should be special unit at the National Guard of Ukraine. It should be placed. We propose to place it in Khersonsk Oblast, and there people will serve, both recruiters or those who serve under contract. Part of them will gain experience in ATO area. There will be rotation, and there are many different issues. But there can be a military unit not mono-religious, mono-ethnic, but maybe with some territorial characteristics. So I would like to give the floor to Alexei Garan, professor of Kiev-Mogila Academy. We have different figures in our survey. Also, we have emotions, opinions. Could you please sum up our discussion, and what are the main focuses of this discussion?
I can't summarize all the discussion because the panelists are very clever people, and they expressed very clever thoughts. In general, we have 70% of people who believe that Crimea is Ukraine. This is the section that shows the consensus of Ukrainians. However, there are problems which are demonstrated here, that 20% are saying that it is hard to tell what is the annexation of Crimea to Russia means. Well, there are some people who think let's live as we live without thinking what to do. Yes, there is some danger in this figure that Crimeans themselves are to address the issue of the annexation. Here also we are talking about the future of Crimea, the elections in Crimea. They can give their own result, even talking about elections in democratic conditions. So the future of Crimea, here we can talk about consensus democracy, like political experts are saying, when several communities are in place. There are Crimean Tatars, Russians, and Ukrainians in Crimea. And if we talk about Crimean Tatar autonomy, one community can have just the majority of shares, let's say so. Now all of us started to talk about Crimean Tatar autonomy. This is fair. But we should understand that in this autonomy, Crimean Tatars, they will be a minority. When Crimean Tatar Republic was mentioned, it was titled Crimean ASSR, where Crimean Tatars made up 20%, and there were 50% of Russians there. So we should tell about this. The Crimean Tatars will comprise a minority, but they should have the majority interest despite of that. So this question should be addressed and strategy should be generated when the return will take place. This would be due to political changes. Now we cannot talk about some political pressure which may help us to return Crimea. Mr. Chubarov said that our foreign partners, they will never say that they recognize the fact of Crimean annexation, but they would be proposing some compromise forms, some fair referendums or some joint management. This is inevitable, but it is more realistic to expect some things related to geopolitical changes without strong Ukraine, because our state is not strong. And we can't expect that we can make any pressure on Russia. I listened attentively to Mr. Samus about Muscat fleet. This inspired me. The fantasies, imagination turned on. However, there is one thing concerning nuclear weaponry. I think we can use it as an argument in our talks with the West, but we should understand that the only country which de facto has nuclear weapons, they are countries with very strict control over their own population. Pakistan also has nuclear weapons, but they also had one-party governments. They have strict control over the population, over the citizens. So, and the possibility to ignore international response, we don't care. Let's say. Iran, for example, adheres to this criteria, but it should maneuver anyway. So, when we are saying let's resume nuclear cycles, then the Russian Federation and the West will join. We had this situation, we had experienced it before 1994. Yes, we can use this leverage to press our Western allies, but we should be more realistic. Anyway, and the final remark, what to do indeed? Yes, we know. The experts have elaborated all the strategies and everything is very clear, but the things do not move. And there are some things for which we should be ashamed. Our MPs and maybe we should be ashamed of those for those MPs who sit in the plenary room along with Mr. Chubarov. Free economic area, it has not been established, and the citizens of Crimea, they are treated as non-residents by our banks, Ukrainian banks. So we should elaborate, articulate, and clearly outline the strategy. We can't say that, well, we do not have blockade, but some grassroots citizens, they started and initiated and conducted some blockade. The same concerns the sanctions on the companies. Those companies should face very serious challenges. So when the company is named Vodafone, it can be put some very strict requirements and so on. By the way, about the change in demographic statutes, maybe some campaign should prevent buying of property, of tangible property in Crimea. We can just launch some campaign saying that Ukraine will not in future recognize documents for real property in Crimea if Russians buy property in Crimea. And Ukraine should have also scholarships for higher education of Crimean youth. Otherwise, these scholarships are provided by Moscow. So there are very specific things. And we should also organize pressure, because we see that the government has not been making those things which the power should do. I would like to summarize the questions. What we will have under the scenario that everything will remain as it is now, when the levels of communication, the level of military strategy, the level of the lack of governmental integrated policy, the level of the ministry establishment which is under-established. I would like you to give us just final remarks.
The matter is, this situation, static situation, it will not be static. It will develop positively or negatively. And here, and what is this trend? There should be logic and comprehensive policy, otherwise the trend will be negative. And we have powerful civil society that can concentrate its efforts in order to pressure the government to act in the right direction. Andriy Kymenko, if the trend like this will continue in the activity of state power and also among population, we will lose half of Ukraine after some time, and we open the road for Novorossiya project. We will lose south, southeast, and east. Mykhailo Samus, your opinion, please. I also support this assessment, and I would say that we should remember the aim of Russia in this war. They want to ruin Ukraine. And if we preserve these trends and won't do anything about it in order to fight those threats, Ukraine will disappear. It's not exaggeration. This will happen because Novorossiya project will continue. And this is objective reality. Pavlo Kazarin, your ideas. In 2001, there was a book, Ukraine is not Russia. There is matter who wrote it, actually, we don't know, but everyone read it and laughed. So this is Ukraine, something like Russia, but without oil and gas. And in 2016, we don't have questions. We understand that Ukraine is not Russia, but we do not know where Ukraine ends. in what oblast? So the question is, where does Ukraine end? So, Alexei, your conclusion. Novorossiya project won't be implemented. It was ruined. But because of the position of Ukraine in the east and south, but we see the threat in the fact that we are in the same positions of country that wasn't reformed, and this is a country that is corrupt, and there are many disagreements among people, and this country is not able to solve Crimean issue, and it does not resolve the issue of Donbass, and it becomes an object for manipulation from Putin. So I agree with everything that was said about our work in Crimea and about information strategy and more active position at international arena. But the key to this is change here inside the country, because if this situation continues, we won't be able to defend Kiev. I mean, imaginary. Refat, please, 20 seconds to you. We are speaking about one and the same thing. I want to focus on the main ideas, and I maybe will be rigid in this respect. The matter of restoration of integrity of Ukraine, including the return of Crimea, it is an examination, a test for capability of Ukrainian ethnic nation for creating a state. This is a test for Ukrainian political nation for self-sacrifice to some extent to restore the state. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone for this intellectual work that we have here for 2 hours. And I believe that you heard a lot of interesting things and you have some food for thought. So we want to thank the Fund of Democratic Initiatives for being moderator here at this public debates, and we thank Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Thank you and goodbye. We thank the moderator.